I was an 18-year-old film student when I met the master of special effects to make this documentary about his life and work. Now, 30 years on, I will reveal Hollywood's greatest untold story of movie magic. Now, for the first time, the secrets have been unearthed for those unmade films, missing scenes from the films you love, stunning artworks, models and test footage, all revealing new worlds, epic lands and fearsome creatures that until now had thought to have been lost for all time. Harryhausen, the Lost Movies.
Hello and welcome back. Welcome to part 2 of our celebration of Ray Harryhausen's Lost Movies. This is part 2 of our bumper episode which celebrates the launch of new Titan Books publication, Harryhausen, the Lost Movies, by John Walsh. And in this episode we'll have further interviews from some of the many contributors to this incredible new book, which is due for release on September the 10th. So listen in. We start the episode with a chat with our conservator, Alan Friswell. One of the most important contributors for your book and for all of our projects here at the Foundation is our conservator, Alan Friswell, because as well as being a genius who can restore Ray's models and bring these iconic creations back to life, he's also a mine of information in his own right. He spent hours chatting with Ray Harryhausen and discussing almost every aspect of his filmmaking process, including, of course, the Lost Movies. So we chatted to Alan about Ray Harryhausen's Lost Movies and about one project in particular which Ray had shown interest in the early 1970s. Let's hear what Alan had to say about Ray's version of Conan.
What did you think, Alan, when you first heard that we were doing this book?
I thought it was a great idea because something of that sort is anything to do with Ray is interesting to those who are fascinated by his films and by his work, but obviously of great interest is something which has an original take, something which hasn't been done before. So a project that deals with the speculation as to what might have been and the films we may have seen, obviously that carries a great deal of interest, because while you're reading about this project, you can use your own imagination to try to figure out how Ray might have done this. And obviously in putting together all the information that you have, is kind of like a detective story, trying to trying to formulate the kind of ideas that Ray might have had and just the kind of imagery that might have come to the screen had he actually made some of these films.
You're right, some I found on bits of scraps of paper, and I say I found, of course, I did this with a great deal of help and support from our collections manager, Connor Heaney, and between yourself and Connor, Alan, you've actually now seen, if you like, the final version of the book that's off to the printers. What did you both think when you saw it?
Personally, I thought it was great. It's original, which is, so many things about Ray now, so many bits of information, so many books, all these magazines. So stuff that's original that actually comes over as being fresh is automatically significant because you're reading stuff that you haven't seen before. It's so easy to, when you're writing about someone like Ray, is to repeat what's been already put into print and what people have read, and there is a danger of becoming not stale but kind of too familiar. But so a book of this sort, which comes out of information and reveals ideas and projects and concepts that no one, or very few people, have ever heard of before, is a great idea. And it's been put, I think the layout is wonderful, the writing is terrific. I think it can be a great book.
Yeah, I agree with Alan there. I think probably most of Ray's fans will be familiar with one or two of these projects, such as his War of the Worlds idea, or Force of the Trojans, for example, the unfilmed follow-up to Clash of the Titans. But the sheer volume and variety of different unfilmed projects throughout the book, I think, is what will interest most people. I think as well as that, it's fascinating to get this peek behind the curtain and see just how far along the line that some of these projects came. Ideas like Sinbad Goes to Mars. Some people may have heard the title, but they won't be aware that artwork was created for it, that there was so much correspondence and hard work relating to the idea of a fourth Sinbad film, which just never quite made it off the ground. And that's the kind of thing which your book goes into some detail about the behind the scenes, why these films, where their ideas were generated from, and why they perhaps didn't get quite off the ground, including from the horse's mouth people who were involved with Ray during the sweatbox sessions, I guess, during the making of these films and these artworks.
Yeah, I think that was key. It was, I think as a writer and a filmmaker, I know that external contributors really help bring the past alive. So regardless of what films I've been making in the past, you always try and recreate those situations and reconstruct those environments as close as possible. So if viewers are trying to experience something, a story from the past, it's more than just a sort of a show and tell. So I was very lucky and fortunate to have so many contributors, and we found artwork and of course lots of other material that way. But I think the key thing to this book, and you touched on it yourself, Alan, are the stories straight from the horse's mouth. And there's a sort of I'm looking at the layout now. There's like a 3-page layout for Ray's version of Conan. So in the case of Conan, Alan, there's 3 pages in the book, and almost those pages wouldn't exist at all had it not been for your experience with Ray and talking to him about the work of the artists involved. What can you tell us about that without giving too much away for people who want to buy the book?
Well, the Conan project, such as it might have been, was just after the release of Valley of Gwangi, and it was basically Ray wanted to get away from dinosaurs anyway, because he'd made 2 films with 1 million years BC and Gwangi back to back as it was, and he wanted to do something different. And so it basically came almost certainly through Forry Ackerman, because the Conan paperbacks had been published by Lancer Publications in the late 1960s with incredible covers by Frank Rosetta, who's become famous now as kind of like perhaps the main sort of Conan artist, or at least the person who brought Conan into the modern age, if you like, after the 1930s. Ray was a fan of the Conan stories because he'd read them originally in Weird Tales when he was a teenager. And for various reasons, I don't know if you want me to go into it now or if you want to keep it for the book, but it didn't happen. But there were good reasons really why, and it's a shame because a Conan film made by Ray would have been incredible. To have seen it brought to the screen as it was written by Robert E. Howard would have been an incredible piece of work. It would have been a wonderful film, I suspect. And if that's all you want me to say about it, I'll leave the rest for people to find out in the book.
No, that's perfect. And the interesting thing is, when you think about how Ray was backing the right horse in terms of next projects, there's Conan, there's a few other films in there that went on to be made by other filmmakers, and Ray was right. And even with Sinbad Goes to Mars, there's an equivalent film that did come out in the 1990s we talk about in the book that uses a very similar narrative device to get Sinbad to Mars. So Ray was on the money, wasn't he? With so many of the projects that were unmade, you kind of think, but he was on the cusp of that genre change. He wanted to make a remake of The Deluge, which would have been a classic disaster film in the early 70s. And Michael Carreras, who was head of Hammer Films at the time, was like, I'm not sure if the disaster genre is coming back. Of course, the disaster genre dominated the 70s. Towering Inferno, Poseidon Adventure, Hindenburg, Earthquake, one of my favourites. Earthquake was spectacular. And Meteor at the late 70s, which nobody likes except me, it seems. But Ray was right, wasn't he? He was right on the money with that and with so many other films, including War of the Worlds and Time Machine and so on. Were there many surprises for you, Alan? Because, of course, you know the Ray Harryhausen story well. You know Ray very well. And, you're more than... you're more than just a fanboy. Of course, you're an expert in the foundation. So, with your expert's eyes on, were your eyebrows raised at many of the entries?
A few times, because you managed to come up with some amazing stuff. We're always ready to learn. We're always ready to be surprised by things, and there were quite a few things in there that I didn't know about. Obviously, Ray was very, should we say, eclectic in his choice of subjects. He, as you say, he was kind of before his time. If only he'd perhaps had someone like George Lucas earlier on in his career, with a lot of money, and someone with that kind of foresight. I'm sure that Charles Chenier perhaps saw value in many of the things that Ray wanted to do, but they were fixed into a certain kind of budget, a certain type of scheduling with the studios they were dealing with, and so many of those projects were just kind of financially out of reach. But there are several things in there that I didn't know existed, and I think so. If people like myself, who kind of we know a little bit about Ray and his work, if we can be surprised, then I'm sure the fans and the public will love this book all the more.
Well, a big thank you, Alan, from me and the Foundation to you for helping with the book and helping put it together, and also for having a quick look through it more than once for me, along with you, Connor, as well. Thank you for giving up your time, because it's a big book. There's a lot of pages, and it did need some external eyes, because there's always a few areas where you can improve, and it's, with publishing deadlines, you want to make sure that you're giving the very best, because it's representing Ray's legacy.
Well, it was my pleasure to look at it. I'm certainly looking forward to actually holding a copy in my hands, and it was delightful to see the book in that early stage. And thank you for letting me see it.
Now, without Alan Friswell's contribution, the segment on Conan, which had no artwork, only the books that Ray had in his own personal library, would have been just a bare few lines. It's lucky for us and lucky for people buying the book that Alan was able to share with me that conversation he had with Ray. Now, Alan is a particular enthusiast for those novels and the artwork of Frank Rosetta. It's marvellous, and it's interesting. I recently wrote an article for the Daily Telegraph, and they wanted me to imagine if Ray had made those films and the difference it would have made to the cinematic timeline. Well, had Ray made Conan at the time, he would have been the first filmmaker to have brought together ultra-violence and sword and sandal. Sword and sandal is a term that Hollywood used to describe a certain genre, and that's whether it's Charlton Heston as Ben-Hur or Victor Mature doing what he does in films like Hercules. It didn't happen because nobody thought there would be a market for it, because they thought it'd be a juvenile market, but the certification would be too high for ultraviolence. And of course, in the early 80s, John Milius did it very successfully with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Conan the Barbarian. Still a great film, it works very well. But that line of ultraviolence and sword and sandal, or sword and sorcery, you can trace all the way through to the HBO series Game of Thrones. So Ray, had he followed his instincts, his gut instincts, would have kick-started a new genre there, and had he did what he wanted to do with Michael Carreras at Hammer Films in the late 60s, he would have revived the disaster genre ahead of its actual revival by Irwin Allen in the early 70s. So, it wasn't simply the case was Ray was always looking to pitch things. He really had a sense of the markets, Connor, didn't he? He knew what trends were coming and what was going to work.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme which we see throughout your book, is that Ray always had his he always had this idea of what would work, and as far back as the 1950s, I think in the early 1950s, when Ray was first putting his ideas together for Sinbad, he was told that no, these films aren't popular, this wouldn't be a success, people don't want sword and sandals films or Arabian Nights films, and of course the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad proved all of those people wrong, and it's something that keeps popping up again and again in your book, is Ray having a certain amount of foresight, and these projects really at times being 5 or 10 years ahead of the rest of the pack.
Now, this is a rather interesting. So, The Tortoise and the Hare was one of Ray's fairy tales that went uncompleted until the year 2002. Now, you caught up with the two very innovative filmmakers, didn't you, Connor, about their story of bringing Ray's film back to the small and big screen?
Yes, I was lucky, very, very lucky to be shown around the studio of Screen Novelties when I was in Los Angeles last year with Vanessa Harryhausen, and Mark Caballero and Seamus Walsh were kind enough to meet us there and show us around. Lovely guys. That was probably the highlight of the trip, to be honest. They were just fantastic hosts and showed us all around their incredible stop motion studio. They were working on a top secret project at the time, which was really wonderful to see. And after our tour, we sat down and had a chat and spoke about the story of the Tortoise and the Hare. As well as that, I asked them about some of Ray's other lost movies, and I wanted to know what they thought it was that they offered Ray Harryhausen that persuaded him to accept their offer of completing The Tortoise and the Hare. So many people approached Ray over the years and tried to coax him out of retirement by inviting him to work on their projects, and Ray would usually politely decline. But there was something about these two young stop-motion animators from Los Angeles that, he thought they had an interesting concept. And let us listen now to a little bit about the story of The Tortoise and the Hare and how that film eventually came to be completed some 50 years after its initial conception. I'm in Los Angeles with trustee Vanessa Harryhausen and friend of the foundation Tammy Himalayan, and we've just had a wonderful tour of the Screen Novelties workshop with animators Mark Caballero and Seamus Walsh. And Mark and Seamus have a very, very special connection to Ray Harryhausen's work when they helped to complete The Tortoise and the Hare in 2003. Mark and Seamus, can you tell us a little bit about your work with Ray and all of these great anecdotes behind the project?
Well, needless to say, we've always been fans, and when Seamus and I met, we immediately started talking about stop motion animation because we both had a fondness for it, and talking about historical things and everything. Ray came up pretty quickly, and Shay had the Film Fantasy scrapbook, and we were kind of thumbing through it, and we had seen still images of his fairy tales, and we're like, we need to see these because they weren't readily available at the time. And so we started watching some of those, and starting our own animation, and that's when we saw the Richard Schickel documentary, right?
Right. Yeah, because I remember reading about the Tortoise and the Hare just being sort of mentioned as a little anecdotal footnote in the Film Fantasy scrapbook. I believe there's a little mention of it. I think he even talks about the final one someday will get completed. But yeah, it was cool because my dad bought me that book when I was like in 4th or 5th grade.
Oh, wow.
Because my dad was a fan as well, actually. So I was just lucky that he bought me that book, and I would pore over it, and I was always kind of obsessed with the fairy tale films because, they would run the movies on TV, but the fairy tales, they had only really been seen in schools. So I remember being in 6th or 7th grade and just being like, where can I see these films? Because it's like I didn't have a VHS machine or anything. But even then they weren't available. So anyway, it's just so funny that we ended up meeting him years later and just through asking him about those films because they weren't very widely seen. We kind of got on the subject of the Tortoise and the Hare there, and then, I don't know, off and on.
We had just talked about, like, once we had seen some of the footage in the Richard Schickel documentary, we thought, we had just come back from Ray speaking at the Animation Festival in Pasadena.
Oh, yeah.
And we were roommates at the time, making our own little films in the garage, and we were watching it with all our friends, and we saw the footage of Tortoise and Hare. We're like, you know what? And we were so like excited and pumped from watching Ray speak that we're like, we should offer to Ray
to help out
to
in
help
some
finish
way.
that. I said, thank you.
But the thing is, we felt like we just said, hey, if you are going to finish that someday, we'll volunteer our time to fix the puppets or do whatever you want, just to help see it happen. But we didn't realize how involved we would get. We didn't think he would really hand that much of it off. But he was 80 years old at the time. He didn't want to animate it all himself anymore.
He wasn't 80 yet. He was in his mid-70s.
Okay,
No, I'm sorry, like 77 or something.
Something like that. Yeah. But he didn't want to have to do it all himself. But so it was sort of like it went from us sort of saying, hey, we'll volunteer to do this and that. But then at one point he says, I think you guys can handle this, because we had shown him our little shorts and stuff, which weren't the same style-wise or anything, but he saw enough in it that he felt like we could pull it off, I guess. And then we were like, whoa.
We had gotten a hold of Ray through two different people. Richard Jones, who had done Aliens, Dragons, Monsters, and Me. We were friends with him because Seamus used to work at the Kyoto Brothers, and and
they were all affiliated.
And one of the hosts for that was Gary Owens, and I used to record Gary Owens at a recording studio that I worked at. And so we each asked Richard and Gary about Ray, and Gary told me, well, talk to Richard. And so Richard made an initial phone call. Ray's like, oh, maybe. And so we typed a little hand-typed letter just expressing our interest in helping him finish it. And that was pretty much it. And we were trying to be as respectful as we could and everything. And
not overstep our bounds or anything.
Yeah, because we always see, like, just living in LA, you always see people that kind of glom on too quickly and stuff. And so we didn't want to be those kind of people. So we just sent him a little polite letter and then didn't think much of it because we thought there's no way. And then a month later we got the letter. And we're like, oh! Like, we had it up on the wall. And
we need to find that.
It was like a Frank Sinatra poster. We were like teenage girls. We were like spelling down to it because it was pretty amazing.
From Ray Harryhausen. Yeah.
And then
that was so cool.
We replied back to him saying, okay, great. We would love to help in any capacity you see fit for us. We had just gotten offered animation jobs at MTV in New York. And we felt like it was a good opportunity to hone our skills before we jump into this. And Ray thought that was a great idea. And so we flew over to New York for a while. And then he was in town about a year later, and we flew back to meet with him at a hotel off of Beverly. And we showed him our terrible little films. And he saw our enthusiasm in it, and he seemed very excited about it. He's like, okay, let's do this. And we're like, okay. And then we told him when our end date was, and we returned back to LA. But in the meantime, I remember Ray had sent us a letter in New York, and he was going to be in Washington, D.C. For a convention. And so I think you were out of town, so I rented a car and drove down from New York to Washington, D.C. to pick up the Cine special. And that was a lot of fun because I was there, and we met in the hotel room. And he's like, see that building up there? It was the Washington Monument. It was being restored, so there's all this like scaffolding on it. He's like, we're fixing that because of me. So he handed off the camera to us, and then I drove back, and we were just like holding it. We showed some of our friends, like, hey, look, and they're like, what is that for? We can't tell, because we swore like an oath not to say anything. And we came back down here, and then that's where we met at Nathan Duran's house to do the final, handshake and handing off the puppets. Richard drove us, and
well, at that time Ray was coming out to LA still quite frequently. It seemed like 3 or 4 times a year he would come out. So that was great because it allowed us to sort of like go back, do some work, and have him come out and review. There was actually a decent amount of time that he was actually here for all of that process.
Right. So we had got the puppets, and the first order of business was just to assess how the puppets were and what condition they were. And we brought in Seamus' wife Robin because she comes from a puppetry background and a museum restoration and preservation background. Mm-hmm. And we all kind of looked at the puppets together. We brought in another friend who his name was Caesar, who specialized in miniature period costumes as well, and he knows fabrics really well. So we kind of did some forensics and tried to figure out, the Hare's overalls were a little bit too faded, and so we wanted to make sure it matched the footage, and so we had to find the same kind of denim that, or it was just
it
cotton.
got re-dyed or something like that. Or,
Yeah, no, I think there was just some cleaning that was done, and then we had to ask Ray all these questions. I keep on saying your father, but we're on a podcast, so it's not your father.
This is here
But
too.
we kept on asking him all these questions, and we have you probably have the letters like, what kind of plants were those that you picked for the trees, and what did you use this? And because we wanted to get so close to what he did, and he told us that he went to Olvera Street to buy some plants there, and then we found out that he also went out to the desert and bought and just picked creosote leaves and branches and stuff, that because the scale of them were so small that it was perfect. So we would just do that, and we preserved them the same way that he did.
We
It
tried
didn't quite
to
work that way, but
we tried to limit ourselves to the technology that he would have used at the time, even though we did sometimes use some video assist just to make sure cameras didn't get bumped
Right.
and stuff like that.
But we used surface gauges, and later on we used gloves and stuff. But yeah, that's. I mean, I guess we just went into like this whole thing.
Hopefully you can edit that down.
That's
to something more
what I think is
interesting.
interesting is something about your approach lit a light bulb in Ray's head. So he had many people approaching him, asking him to work on things or various other projects, and he would usually politely decline because he had long since retired. But something about the approach that you guys had, the ideas that you had, and the way that you worked must have appealed to Ray, and he thought, well, these guys could actually complete the film after 50 years.
That's an amazing
it's so odd.
honor.
Yeah, because I can't think of what Ray would have seen in us that would have given him the confidence to say yes.
Yeah, it's weird because our energy.
Honestly,
I mean, we definitely had the enthusiasm. There was definitely the enthusiasm there, just because we felt like what a perfect way to say thanks for inspiring us to do what we do. But yeah, it's like in terms of our animation skills, it's like well, I think one of the things that I remember talking to him about was the challenge of trying to, because everyone's animation is like their signature, their trademark, and it's really hard because you have when you're animating, you're going with your gut on that performance, but it was a special challenge to try to think not the way you would normally just do that performance, or just try to think like, how would Ray Harryhausen do this? And after having watched and internalized all those films so much, it was a really cool and super intimidating challenge to try to go through the acting. But it was great because we could actually we would have lengthy meetings with sandwiches and coffee and all that stuff, and act out everything. So I mean, we actually had a good sort of basis, not only from the work he had done before, but just he still had that childlike sense of everything,
always,
all the way up to the end, So him acting out a scene in 2000 or 2001 is pretty much the same process he would have gone through back in the 50s.
But Vanessa, this is a good point to bring you in, because you were back in the UK at the time, obviously. What was your perspective on this when your dad had taken on this project at that stage in his life, and how did you judge his reaction to how things were going with this new version of the Tortoise and the Hare?
He was very enthusiastic all the time about it, and certainly at the end he kept saying to me when we were watching it, you can't tell where it starts, and the old one is, it's wonderful, it's really good. So
oh, cool.
That's such a compliment.
You couldn't get more of a compliment than that.
Oh my
and he
gosh.
was genuine about it, and every time we saw it, it was a genuine, like the first time.
That's great.
Oh man,
So
that's
thank
great.
you guys very, very much.
Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah,
I mean,
thank you
it's they always say that, never work with the people that you idolize because you'll be disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And we were never, ever disappointed with Ray. He was really the nicest and the funniest and the wittiest, person that we had worked with. And he listened to what we had to say, and he would just sort of like think about it and then just, either agree or disagree. And he wasn't afraid to hold back. And, his I'm sure you've heard this from many people, but his enthusiasm and his imagination were very infectious.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really motivated us. And so we truly, truly wanted to make sure that he was happy with it. And of course, there's a personal gain from it as well, that you get to work with this legend.
Mm-hmm.
But we really did want to make sure, first and foremost, that he was happy that he got the top billing for it, that he got everything, and we were just sort of like these guys that are thanking him for giving us so many years of enjoyment of, you know, inspiration and watching these great films and all this stuff. And so it really did mean a lot to us that we got to work on this. And it's still hard to believe, like, even to this day, we're like, what did we worked on that?
We can't believe we got to do this. We got to, you know, Ray Harryhausen got to come over to our garage and actually animated shots in our garage. It's funny, I wish we should shoot, actually we have so many photos from the time that I'm assuming you guys probably have, but we should make sure you do.
I've got quite a lot of photos.
Do you have the photos of Ray whipping us?
Oh, I don't think I've seen those. No.
We did some photo. We did a little, like, just Richard and us, and we just took some photos because we had just finished. Like, Ray shot the last shot of Tortoise and the Hare, and he came back to watch the dailies and stuff, and we were just taking photos and stuff, and we're like, Ray, we're always just smiling and stuff like that. Why don't we just do one where we're trying to be funny? He's like, how about if I act like I whip you guys? He grabbed the stick and he's like this to us, and we're like, no.
He strikes the perfect rage pose. And we're cowering underneath, like, no.
That was the best thing.
That's
no, I
funny.
think I would remember.
I'll just send you a photo of it.
Sort of quite any typical picture of Ray. Just on the fact that Ray did animate a short sequence of the film, was that something that was agreed from the outset, or was that something that was decided upon later as the project developed?
I feel like it was decided later, right? Because we
were
always
really encouraging him to do it.
We'd sort of hint at it, but we knew it wasn't the kind of thing where you could just throw it out there casually. You know, we would kind of like say, like, well, maybe at some point you could do a shot because it would be just cool. That would kind of like tie the whole thing together. And he was like, oh, we'll see.
But your mother, Diana, was she was the one. She was there the whole time, and she's like, oh, you know, he wants to do it. Very dry.
Of course he's going to do it.
Very stoic, and she's like, no, he's doing it. He's very sweet.
And very seldomly in the previous 20 years before that had Ray actually animated or been near a model, so that did he just take to like a duck to water?
He jumped right back in. It was really cool to see. But he did shoo us out of the stage when it was time to shoot. You know, we got him all prepared, but you know, he had to concentrate. So we just were like, yep, if you need us, we'll be in the other room. And it was funny because we were just letting him animate, and then we're just kind of like outside going, man, this is really surreal.
But we did get to see a little bit of him animating.
Yeah,
he asked us, we had to do something for him, and so we peeked in really fast, and he was just, too bad you guys can't see this, but he was just going so fast. He was like, animating, taking a frame, animating, taking a frame, and he was just, it was almost like an exercise video. He was going so fast with such confidence. He took, I remember the first shot he took that pencil and he just drew a little dot on the back of the hare's head. And it's probably still there if you look for it.
Yep.
And he just went for it, and that
was his little gauge point.
The gauge point for the surface gauge, and he just did it.
Yeah, so he just had his little pencil mark, and that's all he needed. You know, he didn't use any frame reference or anything. He just had a little gauge.
The next day, he was so, like 3 hours later, he came out, and 8 seconds in 3 hours, which is amazing. And the next day, we showed him the dailies, and he just sat, I just told you guys this before, but he sat very comfortably in one of our chairs, and we projected it on a 16mm print on the wall, and he's like, oh, that's pretty good. Play it again. Play it again. And we just rewound, played again.
Looping it.
He was very proud and pleased with it. And we were too, because we were blown away.
That must have been fun. Yeah, that must have been fun for him having, like you said, I assumed he must have done some kind of animation here and there. But no, I mean, he was retired and he was traveling and stuff like that, so he wasn't animating. But so that must have been pretty fun for him to see new animation that he had done after that long. I mean, I can't imagine that. It must have been really cool. Yeah. He did look very pleased that day. It was fun.
Very happy. No, and then he's like, okay, when shall I come back?
Yeah, then he came back and he did more shots. That's was
Yeah.
a cool thing because he kind of got bitten by the bug again.
Oh,
So we
gosh.
expected like maybe we'd be lucky if he did this one shot, but I think he ended up doing it like 4 shots.
4 shots, yeah.
Yeah,
But
which
that's
was
an
cool.
obvious thing, I suppose. It seems like an obvious thing to say, but Ray enjoyed animating, and that,
course,
that's a
loved it.
passion.
Yeah,
so
that
for you
was-
guys to give him that opportunity
Yeah.
to come back and do
Yeah.
it for a few days and do a few shots in this.
Yeah.
It was
film
really
must have
cool.
been a real thrill.
It was, and it gave us such an insight on his like thought process of animation as well. Like when he would, you know, when you're about to animate, you think about your shot and what kind of acting you're going to do with it and how you're going to move the character and stuff. And we would watch all of his films, and sometimes we'd step frame through each one. And a lot of people had theories that he had a formula and stuff of how he animated, and we're like, no way. He was an actor inside and out. Like you could have put him in a film or on stage or behind the camera, and he could act. And we would see these movements that he would do. Like one in particular was the Cyclops, right? in
Yeah.
Seventh Voyage, where he would take the tree trunk and like smash those guys down and stuff. But he had to follow the movement of the humans running around. And so he had to like really stretch those limbs on that character, you know.
Yeah.
And if you were to play it back, it would feel like, oh, that's not natural. But when you see it all played back, it's totally natural.
Well, it is funny because some of the increments don't really make total 100% sense if you're, say, like step framing through. Like that pose doesn't necessarily naturally lead to this pose, but then the overall effect of that performance, it's one of those weird esoteric
Very
animation things.
organic for you.
It's
You know, you can't
Very organic.
mathematically.
It's like it's really it's really not this mathematical thing. It's just his burst of creativity. That's the thing. Ray's a singular artist, you know, like that imagination just bursting off the screen like that. But it wasn't so calculated, you know. He had to just kind of let it flow out.
Yeah.
So that, to me, that was one of the things that I felt like I learned while we were doing that project is just like, don't get bogged down in the technical stuff. Just let the performance
move
burst
forward.
out there
Keep on
and be
moving
forward.
dynamic.
Yeah.
And don't ever measure anything. You know, like, you just got to let it flow. Because then when you start measuring, that's when you can kind of like lose the life really fast.
His homework assignment to us while we were, you know, doing our restoration work and our practicing our animation style was to watch. He made us watch, which was no problem to us. Was all the Hal Roach comedies, specifically Laurel and Hardy and
we watched hours
Charlie
of that.
Chase.
Yeah.
And
We were already all into that stuff.
we were
So I
already
think
into
we
it anyway,
bonded
so-
over that stuff definitely.
and then at that time, did we give him a little VHS copy of the Charlie Chase shorts? Or the Thelma
Yeah, I
Todd
think so.
shorts?
Yeah, the Thelma Todd and Charlie Chase. Those were other Hal Roach comedies that he hadn't seen in a long time, and we had somewhere. I think probably at Eddie Brandt's, we probably picked those up.
Yeah, so there's little Laurel and Hardy moments, I think, in the Tortoise and Hare that we tried to do.
It's like method animation where you're
Yeah.
putting yourselves in the mindset of the late 1940s.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
And
Yep.
another cool little thing that we would do with Ray is when we were going into post production, we had finished all the shots. Ray came back down, and we would spend hours and hours and hours editing. He would just sit very comfortably on the couch, and Shay would be
With the
sitting
cat.
with my cat. Like the cat would just lay on him, and then Shay would be on the computer, and we'd have the screen right there, and Ray would direct us for the animation, and he wasn't afraid to cut stuff out, you know, and you know, I remember there's one shot where I did with the Hare kind of like playing around with the gate before he opens it, where he's like, cut that out, we don't need it. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. But he was right in saying that, because he was keeping in mind the pacing of the whole piece and everything, and it was very smart of him to do that. And I think there's a couple of takes that haven't seen the light of day yet because of that reason. which is always
Yeah, we should
fish them
transfer
out.
all that stuff.
Oh, that
we should
would be-
transfer all the outtakes.
Wonderful
that
to
would be
see.
interesting.
Yeah.
Outtakes would be very interesting given
Yeah.
everything that you've just said. Now, one of the projects, you guys are obviously incredibly busy just now, so we won't take up too much of your time because you're working on a major project yourself. One of the things we're working on at the foundation at the minute is looking into Ray Harryhausen's lost movies. So projects that Ray had come up with or had pitched, which never saw the light of day for various reasons.
Mhm.
And the Tortoise and the Hare would have been one of these if you guys hadn't stepped in. It would have been incomplete. You mentioned before that there was potential for further lost treasures to be animated by you guys following on from this project.
Yeah, that we got it. It was just at the heels of wrapping Tortoise and the Hare. We had our screening at the Egyptian, and everybody was very excited. And Richard Jones, who helped put this all together with us, had suggested, like, maybe you guys should do another one. And we're like, well, sure, why not? And so Richard couched the idea to Ray, and the idea of doing Baron Munchausen came up. And the next time Ray came into town, he had the artwork that he showed us and stuff, and I went crazy because I really love that story of Baron Munchausen. It's such a great story, and I love the Terry Gilliam film so much, and we're like, yes, that would be so nice. And we had gone back and forth a little bit and stuff, but unfortunately, it never really made the light of day. It would have been so much fun to have done it.
But one of the items which Vanessa uncovered in Ray's gallery in Los Angeles was the Moon Man from the Baron Munchausen test footage that Ray
Yes.
shot.
Oh,
And
wow.
you may well know this, but the test footage was Ray's early experiment in having a stop motion character speak. So when you look at this model, there's all these levers in the back to
Yeah.
get the mouth moving.
That-
Yeah.
I
I
remember
think
that.
he realised quite soon that it was going to be far too complex to do that in a
Yeah.
stop motion film. But we have the test footage.
Yeah.
I mean, would that be something that you guys would even comprehend doing, having the Moon Man speak and syncing? Is it possible as professional animators?
It's possible. It just depends on how many resources you have to devote to it. You know, like you can do anything.
Right.
As an artist, if you've got all this time, then you can make things happen.
Even doing Baron Munchausen again would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, I've always loved
You know,
that.
that's
Yeah.
something to
That
think
would be
about.
so
Yeah, it is
much
one
fun.
that we have lots of storyboards for, because I think in Ray's
Yeah.
early days, around the time actually of the sort of just before the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Ray was putting so many different ideas together
Yeah.
because they wanted to have a lot of sort of irons in the fire just
Yeah.
in case one
Yeah.
project
You have
didn't work
to,
out.
yeah.
So there's a lot of wonderful storyboards, and quite unusually there's oil paintings as well for Baron Munchausen.
Oh, yeah.
Ray didn't
Yeah.
make too many
Oh,
oil paintings
yeah.
in his lifetime, but there's these lovely oil paintings of Baron Munchausen.
I feel
on the
like he
moon,
showed us
and,
those. Yeah.
they're really
I think
striking.
he
Show
took
them
some
to you.
photos.
The one is there one of like a really big moon?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember that.
One of them escaping on the bike with
Yeah.
some sort of
Yeah.
vulture, two-headed
Yeah.
vulture,
Yeah.
which obviously was incorporated into Seventh Voyage of Sinbad,
Right,
and in a
right.
way it was adapted.
Mhm.
But no, that is really fascinating to hear that was potentially, it was something that Ray was interested in, if nothing else, as you guys perhaps following up on a Baron Munchausen.
How fun would that be?
But in a way, it's kind of cool that there's just this one little artifact of that collaboration, and that
Yeah.
kind of keeps it special
Yeah,
in a
sure.
way. You
Well,
know,
what you
like-
guys did is very, very special, and it's such a lovely story, and it's such a kind of unique interlude in Ray's later life to have done this project with you.
Thank you,
And it's
thanks.
now part of Ray's history and the Foundation's collection, of course, because we have all of these models that you worked with and all of these great photography and
cool.
other things related to the film.
I
Cool.
remember during Ray's 90th, we were so honored to have been invited to go to that, and we were talking with Randy Cook. I don't know if you were there with me, but Randy's like, there's such a great thing that you guys did for Ray and stuff, and coming from Randy Cook, I'm like,
He's like
wow.
another one of our
He's
heroes.
another one of our heroes. I'm like, and even now, like, we'll sometimes run into Randy in LA, whatever, like at a movie theater, we're like, okay. And I still feel a little like, kind of like, it's Randy Cook, kind of thing, because he's such a cool guy and so easygoing and stuff.
And he was definitely
smart. And
one of the people that took, along with Dave Allen and Jim Danforth, that kind
Yeah.
of
The
next
transition. They were the
generation.
next generation
Yeah.
right after Ray, so it's just cool to have known. I feel like while we have we've known so many people. The history of our art form that we chose to devote our lives to.
It is such a small history that you really, it's not a big effort to look back at the entire scope of it all and know about all of it and stuff, and that's always cool to learn about.
Well, our knowledge of being passionate about stop motion animation, obviously, like you're saying, you can kind of it's a digestible sort of body of work over the years that I just feel like that's what keeps us going is looking at what had been done and how we can just either like take new technology and do the same techniques but bring them sort of updated into the 21st century, but still keeping one foot in the traditional the tradition of it. I mean, just getting involved with Ray doing this project gave me just this extra level of appreciation for the history of the form and everything.
Right. And he knew stop motion history as well. Like he knew.
He knew about Ladislav Starovich
and Alexander Petrushko
and Trinka and all the old greats.
Yeah, he knew all about.
He knew all about them.
You guys at Screen Novelties are now carrying on the tradition for a new generation.
We're trying.
It's really been wonderful.
We're trying. I mean, we just love doing what we do, and you know, we're just very fortunate in this day and age that you can do this kind of thing, because back at the time of Ray, there was like less than 6 people doing it in the world, you know, and because it was like one of the most difficult mediums to do, if not the most difficult. You know, it wasn't just manipulating a creature with an armature. It was also figuring out how you're going to do the special effect and how you're going to, you know, how is that inside of that lava going to come out of the Talos's heel and stuff like that.
And it's not like he had a lot of.
Went along,
it's not like he had a lot of time to figure those things out either. You know, they weren't like super lavish budgets or anything back then. So. And
this time, it's like we have the benefit of learning from our masters how they did all this, and we can incorporate that into what we do. You know, and if we come up with an original idea, I'm sure that somebody else did it before us. So, you know.
Well, Mark and Seamus, that's been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your
Thank you. It's an honor to be
today.
It's an honor to be part of this podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And like I said before, it's like, you know, working with Ray has been the highlight of our careers, and nothing really will ever top that. I don't care what people say. It's that's it, and I kind of feel like it's downhill from there.
Where do you go from there?
Well, sure, Vanessa will agree, but I think Ray would have been delighted to see everything that you do here as well.
Thank you.
I mean, what we've seen has been fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You continue to do really well.
It means a lot that you guys were here, and that you were here, and that you approved of us working on this area, because.
I think, you know, listening to Mark and Seamus there, I think Ray saw part of himself there. I think he could see himself and his enthusiasm reflected in their enthusiasm for the project. So I think they're more like Ray Harryhausen than the guys probably realise. And that's probably the secret to why Ray worked with them.
I think they were delighted to hear that from Vanessa, because she obviously remembers the other side of that project, which is her father coming home and you know, buzzing, enthusiastic about what had been going on in Los Angeles, and he was delighted by everything that happened with that project, and it's just a lovely story. And yes, really great to hear Mark and Seamus speaking there about the story of the Tortoise and the Hare, and a lost film which eventually came to be completed.
Now, splendid. Now, we've got a couple of special events around this. If you want to tell us about the first one, please, Connor.
So the book, Ray Harryhausen, The Lost Movies, will be released on September the 10th. And a few days after that, on September the 15th, there will be a signing session at Forbidden Planet's London Megastore. And author and podcast co-host John Walsh will be signing copies of this brand new book from 1 till 2 p.m. So this will be your opportunity to get a copy of the book, a first edition, and to meet John and ask John any questions of your own about the research that went into this incredible new piece of work. So John, you must be looking forward to seeing the book on the shelves and people getting their hands on a copy of the Lost Movies book.
No, definitely. I mean, I'm a big fan of queuing for signings, and I remember queuing to have copies of different books, including by Ray Harryhausen, signed over the years at Forbidden Planets. So, it was the place where if I had some money to spend and if I was allowed to go into central London on my own, I would make my way to Forbidden Planets, whether it was when it was in Denmark Street or in New Oxford Street, or now in its glorious corner plots there at the end of Shaftesbury Avenue in its megastore. It's a real mecca for fanboys and fangirls. So thrilling to go there anyway. To have my own book signing there is actually incredibly thrilling. So, I've had different screenings over the years. I've had films in cinemas. I've been nominated and won awards at different prestigious ceremonies. But having a signing at Forbidden Planet, anyone who goes to Forbidden Planet, they'll know that really is a kind of a key touchstone moment. So very excited about that. So after the signing, a very special screening of the 4K premiere of The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. And that will take place at Regent Street Cinema, on Regent Street, in the afternoon at 3 p.m. Now, as I say, it's the 4K premiere of the fully restored version. Picture brighter and more detailed than ever before, and beautiful 5.1 stereo sound. So after that screening, there's going to be a special presentation where we're going to be talking more about the Lost Movies book, revealing some of the images, and exclusively some of the test footage as well. We've prepared a trailer online, which if you log on to Facebook and the Twitter feed, you can see we've cut that together, and it includes some highlights from the book and a little taste of what you can expect from the test footage. But it should be an interesting event, Connor. We're all going to be there.
Yes, I think if you want to come along again, and after you've got your copy of the book at Forbidden Planet, come and watch one of Ray Harryhausen's most beloved movies, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which is definitely a fan favourite, and you'll be seeing it in a crisp, bright colour with fantastic sound, and you'll have the opportunity to see a presentation and Q&A from John. There'll be some special guests there. There'll be lots of people who contributed to the book will be coming along to see the film and see John's presentation. And it is always great for us to celebrate these landmark moments with the foundation. We all are in different parts of the country, so to get together and raise a glass to Ray Harryhausen's legacy, it's always a good thing to do. So please come along on the 15th of September, because it's going to be a day to celebrate the launch of the new book and Ray Harryhausen's legacy in general.
And we'll be there to answer your questions. So I'll be there, you'll be there, Connor, and I'm very pleased to say Ray Harryhausen's daughter and fellow trustee member Vanessa will be there. And I'm rather keen that we get maybe Vanessa on stage as well, so that she can discuss her memories of the Lost Movies.
Yes, again, Vanessa has a very different perspective on a lot of these things, but she does have memories of these projects that her father worked upon, particularly in the 1980s. Projects such as People of the Mist, which again never quite came to fruition, but for which we have some wonderful artwork and even models from.
And people want to know what's the most surprising. It wouldn't surprise you perhaps there were unmade Sinbad. It may not surprise you there were unmade dinosaur films. It will surprise you if you don't know this. Ray turned down the very first Marvels movie. That's in the book. You'll have to buy the book to find out more. We'll do a bit of research. But we're going to finish now, as we should, by hearing a final thought from Ray Harryhausen himself. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
There were a number of other stories I wanted to develop, but few of them came to the production stage. Computer animation today seems to dominate the field of entertainment, but I still believe there is room for every known technique depending on the type of tale to be told. After all, the main reason for putting anything on the silver screen is to entertain. The method used in this process is always secondary to a good, comprehensive visual story.
Copyright in the Ray Harryhausen Podcast is owned by the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, a registered Scottish charity, number SC 001 419 2019. This recording may not be reproduced in whole or in part without written permission from the Foundation. The views expressed within these podcasts do not necessarily reflect those of the Foundation, its trustees or employees. For further terms and conditions, please contact us at rayharryhausen.com, where you can find our Facebook and Twitter links.
Bye.